So it was incredibly terrifying for our librarians, for our library staff, and for their families, to think that, I don't think that librarians typically get into their profession thinking that they could maybe end up behind bars for defending a book. But that's kind of, unfortunately, the state of things in Alabama.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of The Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Angie Hayden, one of the founders of Read Freely Alabama, a coalition that has come together to fight censorship of books and libraries in the state. That was her you heard up top, and my conversation with her is coming up later. It's a good look at how far conservatives in the South are going to control what information people have access to. Also, in our arts and culture spot, I want to take a few minutes to consider the phenomenon that is the Rock the Country tour with Kid Rock and Nickelback. It's in Anderson, South Carolina this weekend. But first, it's time for the news roundup. This week, we have contrasting news on the climate and energy fronts, both tragedy and farce. The tragedy, of course, was the massive flood along the Guadalupe River in central Texas that swept through several summer camps over the 4th of July weekend and killed at least 135 people, 37 of them children. The devastation was wrenching, and it led to an outpouring of grief and sympathy from across the country. It also led, as disasters often do, to finger-pointing and second-guessing about local and federal emergency response. It emerged that neither the local county governments nor the state had ponied up money to install flood warning alarms along the river, despite studies recommending them and a history of prior floods. It also emerged that Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem had allowed some of the Federal Emergency Management Agency's contracts with emergency call center operators to lapse the day after the floods. The result, as the New York Times reported, was that in the second and third days after the disaster, the vast majority of calls to FEMA from Texas residents went unanswered. Those are important details, but they are necessarily on the response side of the equation. How well equipped our state and federal agencies are to identify and react to natural disasters. There's been almost no discussion among Texas leaders or the Trump administration about the causes of increased flooding. And flooding is increasing. According to data from Iowa State University, the National Weather Service issued 3,040 flash flood warnings nationwide from January 1st to July 15th of this year, an all-time record for that period. Some of that is because of more precise forecasting technology that allows for more targeted warnings. But climatologists agree that a lot of it is because the warming climate is leading to a greater accumulation of atmospheric moisture, which is carried from the ocean over land where it discharges in huge volumes. Not only in Texas, of course. North Carolina, which suffered devastating floods in its western mountains last year from Hurricane Helene, flooded again just a few days after the Guadalupe River disaster. As in Texas, it was a result of a slow-moving weather system bringing water in from the ocean. Where Texas was hit by Tropical Storm Barry, coming out of the Gulf, North Carolina suffered Tropical Storm Chantal, which developed in the warm summer Atlantic just off the Carolina coast. For years now, scientists have been cautious about ascribing any individual weather event to climate change, because there are many variables that go into creating a severe storm, and of course periodic seasonal storms were normal long before human activity started warming the global climate. But as patterns have become clearer and more persistent, so have their scientific explanations. As a headline in the Texas Tribune put it, unambiguously, quote, "Climate change helped fuel heavy rains that caused hill country floods, experts say." Claudia Benitez Nelson, a climate scientist at the University of South Carolina, put it this way to the Tribune: "This is not a one-off anymore." She said extreme rainfall events are increasing across the U.S. as temperatures rise. That was also the consensus of the 5th National Climate Assessment, released in 2023 by the U.S. Global Change Research Program, which was established by an act of Congress in 1990. The 1,800-page report pulled no punches about the realities of climate change and the effects it is having. Harmful impacts from more frequent and severe extremes are increasing across the country, the report said, including increases in heat-related illnesses and death, costlier storm damages, longer droughts that reduce agricultural productivity and strain water systems, and larger, more severe wildfires that threaten homes and degrade air quality. It also was specific about the causes, saying, quote, "It is unequivocal that human activities have increased atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. It is also unequivocal that the global average temperature has risen in response." 2024, the year after that report was released, was the hottest year for global temperatures since record-keeping began in the 1800s. So far, 2025 is on track to be the second hottest. But talking about climate change, its causes or effects, is out of fashion among national and state-level conservative leaders. President Donald Trump has repeatedly called climate change a hoax, and his administration has moved aggressively to curtail efforts to reduce carbon emissions. That includes shuttering the U.S. Global Change Research Program, which produces the national assessment. The federal website that used to prominently spotlight the 2023 report went dark last week, returning only an error message. The report is still available for now on an archive site, which I will link in the show notes. Work that had begun on the next iteration of the report, theoretically due by 2027, has been halted. Many southern states are particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change for the obvious reasons that we are already in the warmer part of the country and are, for the most part, either on or close to the Gulf and Atlantic coasts. But you wouldn't know it from the ways our leaders talk or don't about climate change. That is the farcical side of this equation, although it's obviously not very funny. To take a few examples, in April, Texas State Comptroller Glenn Hegar told MIT's Climate Portal website that it was, quote, pretty arrogant, unquote, to think that humans could have much effect on the climate. He added, quote, "The bottom line is, as long as humans have been on this earth, and way before then, the fact is the climate has changed on its own." Hegar was recently named chancellor of the Texas A&M University system. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis last year signed legislation removing references to climate change from state law and the state's energy policy. Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville, who recently announced he is running for governor in 2026, has called concern over global warming, quote, a cult-like obsession with climate alarmism. Two southern states have gone beyond ignoring climate change to engage in outright propaganda for increased carbon emissions. Louisiana, which, as we've noted before, is the second most polluted state in the country, passed a law this year classifying natural gas as, quote, clean energy, which means that any state goals or requirements for use of clean energy must allow gas as an option. This is, frankly, ridiculous. Natural gas is a fossil fuel, and burning it releases carbon into the atmosphere. It does burn more cleanly than coal and oil in terms of putting particulate matter in the air, but its carbon emissions are very real. Approximately 35% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the United States come from the burning of natural gas. The Louisiana law may be scientifically disingenuous, but it dovetails with the state's move to expand its gas-fired power capacity. Entergy, Louisiana's largest power company, is planning a 2-megawatt gas power plant that will partly help power a massive new data center being built in the state by Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram. Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry has, like Trump, called climate change a hoax. On taking office last year, he hired a new Secretary of Energy and Natural Resources, Tyler Gray, a former president of the Louisiana Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association, the industry's lobbying group. Tennessee, meanwhile, has done Louisiana one better, or worse, in its abuse of energy-related adjectives. The volunteer state had already passed a law in 2023 declaring natural gas a clean energy. But this year, its legislature went even further, labeling it a, quote, renewable energy. This is even more dishonest than calling it clean. Renewable in energy terms means a source that can be replenished on an ongoing basis. That applies to solar, wind, and hydro energy, which are produced every day by the natural processes they rely on. Like oil, natural gas is formed deep in the earth through the long-term breakdown and compression of biological materials. The gas we use now has been produced over many millions of years. It cannot be regenerated. Of course, the Trump administration is also leading an assault on actual renewable energy. The recently passed federal budget bill will end incentives created under President Joe Biden for the construction of solar and wind power facilities, both of which Trump has consistently derided. Many Southern conservative leaders have also adopted the president's stance. 10 Republican governors banded together last fall in a coalition opposed to any federal mandates for renewable energy production. Half of them came from southern states: Louisiana, Tennessee, Virginia, Arkansas, and Georgia. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has avoided talking about climate change during his 3 terms in office and has balked at providing state incentives for renewable energy production while championing the state's massive fossil fuel industries. But the reality in the Lone Star State doesn't quite square with those talking points. Texas is actually in the midst of a boom in both solar and wind energy. According to data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, Texas leads the nation in total renewable energy production, and has for more than a decade. It generated 169,000 gigawatt hours of wind and solar energy in 2024, far ahead of second-place California with 92,000 gigawatt hours. Texas generates about 30% of its total power from renewables, the highest percentage of any southern state. But no other southern state currently generates more than 11% of our power through renewable sources, and 8 are in single digits. There is, of course, an especially harsh irony at the height of southern summers, when much of life, personal, professional, and recreational, depends on air conditioning for basic comfort. In states without strong renewable energy sources, states like Tennessee, where I live, that air conditioning is running primarily on fossil fuels, which are contributing to still warmer temperatures in the future. And warmer temperatures mean more water in the atmosphere, and more storms, and more floods. Okay, now we're to my interview with Angie Hayden. Like many grassroots activists, she didn't set out to be an activist at all. She was just bothered when she heard about efforts to restrict books at her local library. Book bans at both school libraries and public libraries have become increasingly common in recent years as part of the post-pandemic conservative backlash against diversity and inclusion. The books that have been most targeted are those by or about LGBTQ people, along with books about racial minorities and the uglier aspects of American history. As you'll hear, Hayden became involved when a handful of conservative activists started demanding some books be moved or removed from the library in Prattville, Alabama, just outside Montgomery. She had her own personal reasons for pushing back. And that led over time to the creation of Read Freely Alabama, a volunteer coalition of supporters of libraries and First Amendment rights across the state. This is a good report from the front lines of the fight against censorship, particularly in the South. As always, you can find sources and references in our show notes. So, Seth, let's go to the tape. All right, I am very happy to be joined by Angie Hayden, who's a co-founder of Read Freely Alabama, to talk about what's going on there. Angie, thanks a lot for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here to talk to you about this.
So let's start. I'm always curious how people get engaged in sort of, political work of various kinds. And I realize libraries aren't necessarily inherently political, but these days it seems like everything is. What is where did you grow up? How did you first engage? How important were libraries and reading to you growing up? Just kind of, what was your relationship to libraries?
Sure, yeah. Libraries should not be political, ideally. Unfortunately, here we are. I have always been an avid reader since I was a little girl, starting probably with the Little House on the Prairie books. And my daughters, who are now grown, also both avid readers, early readers, always read above their reading level. And, they grew up in the Autauga Prattville Public Library. That was their library. I have pictures, actually, of them walking out of that library with books stacked up to their little noses. And it so turns out that my oldest is now part of the LGBTQ community. She and her wife live about an hour away from here. And so when I heard that these groups, these women from what is basically Moms for Liberty by another name, here in Prattville, it was a group called Clean Up Alabama, were demanding that books that were simply affirming of LGBTQ families, really, be removed from the children's section of the public library. That kind of spurred me into action, I suppose. I had never been publicly political in that way. I would never have considered myself an activist. But I showed up to our city council meeting that night to speak right after, who is now the executive director of Clean Up Alabama. And after she did her 3 minutes and waved some books around and tried to scare the community, I stood up and said, I'm Angie Hayden, and I'm here to let you know that there's more than one kind of concerned parent in Prattville. So it is incredibly personal to me, not only for my children, who, like I said, are now grown, but for kids like them that are in this community. I think often about what it says to the children who know that they are a little bit different, to see that these books are being hidden away and being told that books about people like them are dangerous or inappropriate or explicit in some way, just by their very nature of being. And it spurs my mother's heart into action, I think. So that has been what has brought me to this work, and it's what keeps me from letting it go, I think.
And that was, a couple of years ago? Was it 2023 that it all kind of blew up there?
Yes, that was the spring of 2023. I started with just myself and a couple of other people, and we collected a few more people at a time. Then a academic librarian joined us and kind of filled in the gaps that we had in our knowledge about how libraries work. And before we knew it, we had this perfect little team assembled. It was like lightning struck. We had moms, we had librarians, we had people who had worked in policy, former reporters, and we made just this little team of people who just kept showing up, and we're still showing up.
And at the local level there, basically there were successful efforts to remove or move books, right? Like what has played out there at the local level, and then also how have you seen that moving to the state level in Alabama?
Yeah, it's been a long battle, and I guess, if I were to tell you everything that had happened over the last couple of years, we would probably be here all day. But to make a very long story somewhat short, it was a very contentious battle here in Prattville, and initially we won. We kept the funding going in our library by one city council vote, and thought, oh gosh, that's over, thank goodness. And then before we knew it, simultaneously they had moved to the state level and started using their influence there with extremists in our statewide political system. And they also started stacking our library board through our local county commission. And so before we knew it, our victory had been turned upside down. And as it stands now, our library has, in my opinion, been completely taken over by extremists. They have removed books. They have removed books even from the adult section. And that is why Read Freely is now a plaintiff in a federal lawsuit against the Prattville Library Board.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about the status of that in a second. But first, I'm just curious what your sense is of kind of the people you're up against here, the Clean Up Alabama organization. I mean, have you, as this kind of brewed there in Prattville, did you talk to them to try to get some sense of where they were coming from? I mean, who is it who is doing this?
Yeah, so these groups are the same. I believe they are spearheaded by the same groups that you see popping up all over the country. Moms for Liberty. I cannot tell you exactly where their funding comes from. I suppose we could all have our guesses. But this group here, Clean Up Alabama, works directly with Moms for Liberty. They work side by side with them. We have seen their leaders celebrating in private Moms for Liberty Facebook pages. We have seen, actually, unfortunately, members of our state APLS library board doing the same. So it's really sad to see a repeat of what has happened here in Prattville. The stacking of the board with extremists happen in the exact same way at the state level. We have a state library board member, Amy Dozier-Minton, who, before being appointed, she herself challenged, I believe, 30 books in her local library that were simply affirming of trans people. She actually, after she was appointed, she went back to her library and threatened a librarian's funding if they did not remove a book about a little boy who wanted to be a cheerleader. So you see these extremist groups who have been at this work for a very long time behind the scenes, and what we are seeing now is the fruit of their labor for the last however many years. I know there was a lot of talk about Project 2025, and it's so relevant to this topic for me because I heard someone say, and I wish I could remember who it was so I could give her proper credit, but she said, 2025 was not the start date, it was the completion date. Mm-hmm. And that just, even though maybe at some level I knew that, it really kind of was like a gut punch because you realize how long these people, these groups have been making their plans and putting their people in place. And you can kind of see evidence that this is a very nationally coordinated effort. If you just look at the books that are being challenged, you'll see the same handful of books. Those will be the first books challenged almost every single time, whether that's in Alabama, whether that is in Arizona or Texas or Florida. It's clearly all very nationally coordinated. They will tell you that a local mom just stumbled across the pronoun book in their local library, but the reality is that they were sent there to look for it.
Mm-hmm. And so what kind of organization is Read Freely Alabama, and how did you, because I think one thing that is challenging for people, an issue pops up in their local community that, as you say, may well be being driven at a national level, but if you're trying to grapple with that, that can be sort of overwhelming. How did you build from raising concerns at the local level to having this kind of statewide association?
Yeah, we found, and maybe it surprised even us, even those of us who were the first handful of people showing up, that these extremist groups do not represent the majority of people, even in a very red state like Alabama. So we found that when we showed up as mothers and simply spoke reason, the majority of people are truly on our side. Unfortunately, as kind of going back to what I was saying, these groups have been organizing for so long that they have had a head start on us as we have been, living our lives and, kind of ignorance is bliss, I suppose. You just assume that these institutions will always be there. You take them for granted, and then one day you wake up and you realize that they have been kind of under a silent attack for some time, and you're just now kind of seeing the evidence of that. So, we started this with just a handful of us here in Prattville, and within a year, maybe a year and a half, we had over 3,000 members statewide and chapters all across the state. Whereas these extremist groups, if you look at their followings on their social media, they had maybe 1/10 of that in support. So I think that really speaks volumes about where the majority of the public are on this topic. The majority of parents by far trust their librarians, trust their libraries, want diverse collections in their libraries. And so our responsibility is to show up and make sure that we aren't just handing it over to a very loud minority, because what I have come to know is true is that these groups, Clean Up Alabama, Moms for Liberty, they are a very small minority of incredibly loud extremists. And I tell people all the time, the thing about extremists is that they are going to show up. They are very dedicated to their cause. And I think the lesson for all of us reasonable people, and not just, to the left, not just progressive people, reasonable people in the middle, and honestly, a lot of conservative people are with us as well. This is a very unifying topic, I have found. But the majority of citizens understand that your library is supposed to be, a marketplace of ideas. It's not supposed to be reflective of your local church library. It's not supposed to be catered to any political ideology or any religious ideology. It's supposed to have something for everyone in your community. And as the saying goes, there should be something in your library to piss everyone off. And that's so true, because if you agree with everything in the library, that means that your neighbor probably is lacking something in the library that they need and want to read. So we have been so encouraged by how many of our fellow Alabamians have stood up to this and written their representatives, shown up at their local boards to just kind of speak common sense to this topic.
There's something I'm curious if you encounter there, because I have encountered it in talking to people, say, here in Tennessee, because you're right. If you go out and do polls on this, and especially if you ask people if they favor banning books, like book banning polls very badly. Americans do not like book banning. That's kind of I think it's an inherent, I don't know if anything's an inherent American characteristic, but that one seems widely held. And so what I have heard people say is, well, we're not banning books because they know that language doesn't track well. We're relocating them. We're removing inappropriate material. And so do you run into that with people saying that they're not doing what they obviously are?
Oh, yes. We have seen it from the very beginning when we had members of these groups stand up at our local meetings and say, move, not remove. However, when they are given the opportunity to do what they actually want, they do remove them. And we have seen that happen in our library. We have seen it happen not only with children's books. So there goes the entire argument of protecting the children from obscenity or whatever it is that they like to say, because they are removing books from the adult section as well. And so you see them say one thing when they get in front of the public, and then you see what they actually do. Watch what they do, not what they say. And honestly, even when they are moving books to sections to hide them from the audience for which they were intended, that is still censorship. We have a library in South Alabama right now in Spanish Fort who has just created a new policy that any books that discuss intercourse, sexual orientation, gender identity, or sexual ethics must be in the adult section, 18 plus. And what that means is board books about a little girl who has two mommies are now in the adult section. Books about teenage girls' experiences with puberty, or unfortunate stories of surviving sexual assault. Those are all now restricted to anyone under the age of 18. And, that is also censorship. They have absolutely removed those books from the hands of the people that they were intended for.
So you have this ongoing lawsuit that you mentioned, and I went and looked that up, and it just in looking at the filings, it looks like it's kind of still in its pre-trial motions phase. What's going on there?
Yes, we are getting a lesson in patience with our lawsuit. We are just, kind of on the judge's timeline, and there's really no way of knowing when that might reach some sort of decision. So we are just patiently waiting. Sometimes not so patiently waiting, but waiting all the same.
And in the meantime, obviously, this continues at the state level. And you mentioned the Alabama Public Library Service. That's what it's called, right? What is that, first of all? What authority does it have? And then what has happened to its membership and leadership?
So typically, in times past, up until the last year and a half or so, the APLS has had no authority over where books are placed, over what books are acquired by local libraries. That has always been up to local librarians and library boards. They basically are in charge of distributing the funding, and they have a administrative code by which libraries operate. There are requirements that libraries must have in order to be a public library in Alabama, whether that be guidelines on their reconsideration policies or how many hours they must be open, that type of thing. So they were never meant to decide where librarians shelve books. And now that has all been turned upside down, turned on its head. The library board is now headed by the Chairman John Wall, who is also the chair of the GOP in Alabama, and stacked with a couple of board members who are clearly, if not Moms for Liberty members, then certainly sympathizers. They celebrate their wins with them publicly and congratulate them and work together. So it's kind of been this sort of absolute perversion of this board that was meant to simply be the administrative head of library boards, and now it's being used as a bludgeon against libraries, and they are threatening librarians' funding, as has happened in Fairhope, Alabama. I'm not sure if you've seen the headlines, but they pulled paused Fairhope state funding because they would not move a handful of books that Moms for Liberty there, specifically Moms for Liberty, challenged. One specifically is about a girl who survives being trafficked. And this was a book in the young adult section. So this was for teenagers, high school aged children. And the library board reviewed this book, decided that it was completely appropriate, even if it was, a necessarily difficult read, a heavy topic. They decided that it was right where it should be. And Moms for Liberty went right back to the APLS board, and the library's funding was paused with no warning, with no recourse, with no due process. That would have amounted to about $40,000 a year. And when we immediately heard about that, we had members at the APLS meeting where that happened. And by the next day, we were working on setting up a fundraiser to make up those lost funds. And I believe within 4 or 5 days, we raised more than the missing funding, which I think, again, goes to show where the public really stands on this topic, that to see them rally behind the little library in Fairhope in that way, and people all across Alabama. And I would encourage actually everyone to go to our fundraiser website, which the fundraiser is clearly already closed. But there's a section where you can see the comments that people have left as they left their donations. And it's really heartwarming and encouraging to see former teachers, librarians, people from not only all across Alabama, but there are actually a few from all across the country who heard about this story and wanted to make sure that the Fairhope Library had the support that it needed.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I'll definitely I'll link that in the show notes so people can go there and read that. And I'm guessing that kind of state leverage might have outsized effect on more rural and small town libraries who maybe don't have the local resources that bigger city libraries have, right?
Absolutely. That's the flip side to the heartwarming story about Fairhope. Being able to make up that lost funding for the year is the knowledge that Fairhope, being a fairly well-positioned community in Alabama, that there's, Fairhope, I would not say is lacking in financial means by any sense. However, here in Alabama, we have community libraries that are a one-room trailer, and they do not have the ability to stand up against a state library board who is holding their state funding over their head. Mm-hmm. And when you think about these tiny communities where this may be the only place where someone has access to a computer or a printer, somewhere where they can apply for a job or go to get help to get their Social Security benefits. All of those other things that we sometimes forget that libraries do so well. When these librarians are looking at those people in need, and they're looking at the state board saying, do this or else, you can imagine the pressure and the decision between standing up for their professional ethics and keeping their doors open. That's really what it boils down to for some of these libraries. And so that is our main focus going forward, is making sure that we are fighting not just for beautiful Fairhope Library, the beautiful people there, but also for the libraries that probably won't ever, their stories might not ever see the light of day because their librarians are too afraid to speak out because there's so much at risk. So we are diligently working at our own local level, at the state legislature level, because we haven't even gotten to that. There's so much to discuss. The bills that have, thank goodness, died in the legislature this session, and also at the APLS state administrative board level. It's kind of coming at us at all fronts, and we're just incredibly dedicated to fighting for every single library in Alabama.
Yeah, I saw there were a couple of big bills up there this year, including one that could have potentially criminalized. Librarians could have faced criminal charges if certain books were in the wrong place. It sounds too absurd to
even be true, but HB 4 was written in such a way that your local Moms for Liberty person could go to your library director and say, Heather Has Two Mommies is propaganda and I want it gone. The librarian would then have had, I believe, a little less than 2 weeks to review it and notify that person. And if the complainant was not satisfied with the decision that was made, it would automatically escalate to a law enforcement matter. And that gave no means for the librarian to defend any book. So really what it was just a free license for any extremist to remove any book from your local library that they did not like for any reason whatsoever. So it was incredibly dangerous. And, when I look back over what happened in Prattville through 2023 and 2024, if that law had been in place, I have no doubt that the librarian that we unfortunately lost in all of this, who was fired, Andrew Foster, I have no doubt that they would have used every legal means to put him behind bars if they could have. So it was incredibly terrifying for our librarians, for our library staff, and for their families, to think that, I don't think that librarians typically get into their profession thinking that they could maybe end up behind bars for defending a book. But that's kind of, unfortunately, the state of things in Alabama. That's where our lawmakers have let things go. So it's imperative. This goes back to what I was saying earlier about extremists and how they show up. And if your listeners take anything at all away from this, it would be that you have to show up just like they do. If we do not answer with as much consistency and passion as they do, we truly are just handing it to them. We are giving it away. And as one of our other co-founders, Sam Olson, has said since the beginning, these books are a proxy for human beings. This is where it starts. And when we let them say in our public institutions, in our public spaces, that books about queer children or their families or Black and brown families and their stories, because it has already spread to those books as well, are inappropriate or dangerous, it's not a far leap to more scary things. And this is nothing new. This is not a new fight. When you look back even so far as Hitler's Germany, which I know sounds hyperbolic to a lot of people, but I think a lot of people don't realize that the first books burned in Germany were at the Institute of Sexual Health. There were books about LGBTQ people, trans people largely. Those were the first books that were burned in Hitler's Germany. And so we really do see history repeating, and it's really it's on us to make up to stand up to it and make sure that it doesn't happen again.
All right. Well, I think that's probably a good place to end the conversation. So thanks very much for your time, and I'll be following that lawsuit, and probably checking back in with you just to see how things are going there, because as you say, I think the fight has taken particular dimensions in Alabama, but it is certainly something we're seeing in many states and definitely across the South. It's happening in many places.
Thank you so much, Jesse.
This weekend, the Rock the Country Summer Tour will park itself in Anderson, South Carolina, a little southwest of Greenville. It is the final of 10 dates on the tour, which styles itself as a traveling 2-day festival dedicated to certain strands of rock and country music and certain ideas about the United States. Rock the Country was co-founded in 2024 by the rap rock star Kid Rock, who has become known as much for his political conservatism as his easygoing blend of classic rock, country, and hip-hop. Here he is describing the idea in a promotional video.
I said, man, I see a huge void for, you can call them right-wingers, MAGA, you can call them whatever you want. I call them hardworking people that love this country.
The Rock the Country website leans hard into right-wing identity politics. It says, quote, "Rock the Country is more than just a festival. It's a gathering for the true heart of America. This is where hard-working, God-fearing patriots unite under the open sky, celebrating the freedom we hold dear and the power of live music to connect us all. With every note that fills the air, every raised glass, and every shout of excitement, we create memories that honor the spirit of we the people." The tour bills itself as playing exclusively in small towns, although some are smaller than others. Anderson has a population of 28,000, but Little Rock, Arkansas has 200,000. The smaller locations are conveniently located short drives from larger areas. Anderson is 40 minutes from Greenville and only about 2 hours from Atlanta. Most of the 10 stops have been in southern states: Louisiana, Florida, Tennessee, South Carolina, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Alabama. South Dakota also merited a stop, as did the Trump-voting swing states of Michigan and Pennsylvania. The itinerary gives some sense of exactly which hard-working people Kid Rock and the promoters consider their constituency. The lineup says even more. The co-headliners are Kid Rock and the hard rock quartet Nickelback, who are technically Canadian, but are beloved across the 40 to 60-year-old white American demographic. The rest of the roster has varied a bit from stop to stop, but it leans heavily on a certain strata of sturdy Nashville commercial country, predominantly made up of white men, middle-aged and older. Besides Nickelback, the only other major name who would qualify for the rock part of the title is the ongoing corporate entity that still calls itself Lynyrd Skynyrd, despite the absence of any of the band's founding members. The Anderson dates include the septuagenarian Hank Williams Jr., the 57-year-old Tracy Lawrence, and stalwarts like Shenandoah, Mark Chestnut, and Little Texas. There have been a few women here and there on the tour. Jody Messina and Deanna Carter have both appeared, although none are slated for the South Carolina stop. There are a few up-and-comers in the pack. Young country singers Hudson Westbrook and Logan Crosby are in the smaller print on the lineup. And listed at the very bottom, performing what it refers to as house party sets, are its nods to racial diversity. Afro Man and the Yin Yang Twins, black hip-hop artists known to white audiences for songs about sex and drugs and good times. The overall structure of the promotional poster on the website says a lot. At the top are aging white men, including Kid Rock, who became famous performing a specifically black musical form, followed by other white men and the occasional white woman. And at the bottom, separated by a line, a few black entertainers. To drive the festival's ideological orientation home, it also includes video clips of President Donald Trump, who appears on jumbo screens to introduce Kid Rock, whom he calls, quote, as good as they get. You may recall Kid Rock made a visit to Trump in the Oval Office earlier this year. Rock the Country has been successful and popular by all accounts, drawing up to 50,000 people to some of its larger stops. Showbiz being what it is, that makes it likely that we will continue to see it making the rounds in future years, championing a particular vision of America to a particular slice of America. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. If you do feel moved to make a donation, first of all, thank you. And second, make sure you make a note in the comments accompanying it that it is for the Progressive South. Thanks to Bark for our theme music, and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave us a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. We'll talk to you soon.